concentrates on the study of the scriptures, cultivates meditation, and applies the kavacha, the protective religious instruction, all by himself, on himself. The same way is taken by the Prayopagamana death, but here the renouncer does not move anymore once he has settled on the chosen spot on the bare ground. A very interesting subsection of the Prayopagamana chapter is the explicit affirmation of the possibility to end one's life in an abrupt and active way. It says in verse 2072 that in case the accomplished renouncers who are firm in the endurance of hardships are confronted with very serious difficulties, when arms are hard to get and there are hindrances everywhere, they die also by taking recourse to some other means. And I'm going to paraphrase and summarize two stories which can illustrate these points. The impact of this mode of dying will be considered shortly. In verse 2073, it says, Dharmasya of Kosala reached his aim in Kolagiri by means of dying by vultures after having left his wife Chandrasiri. This is the way the stories are alluded to in the Mula Aradhana, very short. And the story is told in the Brihatkata Kosha. King Dharmasimha was happily married to Queen Chandrasri until the time when he heard a sermon by Dhammavara teaching the Jaina Dharma. He renounced the world and wandered off as a mendicant. Since Chandrasri felt very depressed about the loss of her husband, her brother started looking for him. The brother disturbed his tapas several times with his horrifying voice and forced him back to his royal and family affairs. The king, however, renounced the world again and was initiated a second time. His brother-in-law kept searching for him once again. One day, Dharmasimha, the royal mendicant, saw his brother-in-law running after him and decided to die, lest his vow be broken again. He made his confession, and renouncing his life, he placed himself into the kadaver of an elephant. He died in samadhi and became a radiant god. This placing himself in the cadaver of an elephant means that the Dharmasimha chose to be eaten up by vultures, since they would tear and pick up the entire cadaver. It is accepted under certain precarious circumstances when the right path is impossible to be followed. The other story is somewhat surprising by the use of a weapon and also by the particular circumstances of Atma Vighata, a self-sacrifice for the sake of the community. The synopsis is given in the Mula Aradhana, saying, in order to avert a public outrage, a Ganin killed himself with a weapon. When the Buddhist Ahimaraka, who had feigned to be a Jaina monk, had murdered the king. It is told in the Brihatkata Kosha. Jayasena, king of Shravasti, was Buddhist and his guru was Shivagupta. Once the Jaina Acharya Yati Vrishava came to the town and his sermon on Jaina Dharma convinced the king completely. So he became an ardent Shravaka who converted his family and his country to the Jaina faith. much to the annoyance of his former Buddhist guru, Shivagupta, who then plotted against the king. He engaged the Buddhist layperson Abhimara to murder the king. And this Abhimara approached the Acharya Yati Vrishaba and bowed to him full of false devotion. Once the king went to the temple where Yati Vrishaba practiced tapas, in order to pay homage to him, he left his entourage outside and entered the inner hall. Abhimara, with false devotional attitude, also made his way inside, where there were now just these 3 persons in the sanctuary. When the king bowed in front of the Acharya and touched the ground, Abhimara stabbed him with a sharp knife in his throat and disappeared. The Acharya saw that the king was dead and immediately realized that the situation was very dangerous for the Jaina community. He knew that to avert the impending danger, he had to make a self-sacrifice, Atma Vighata. Using the blood of the king, he wrote on the wall with his hand. This deed was committed not by me, but by Abhimara. But apprehensive of the reproach by the people and to avoid public calamity, I'm killing myself in accordance with my status of a Muni. Here we have the whole political impact of this scene. After the self-reproach and other prescribed actions, he performed renunciation of everything, and he recited the Panchanamaskara mantra. Then the righteous one took the knife, cut open his belly, and gained Samadhi Marana and went to heaven. The king's son arrived at the spot, saw the 2 dead bodies, informed the community, and read aloud what the Acharya had written on the temple wall. And he himself lived on as a pious Jaina. These accounts should add one more accent to the Jaina modes of dying. Killing oneself, even by means of a weapon, is condoned under circumstances. I come to the end. After this excursion into the Mula Aradhana, one of the most pertinent texts of Jaina death culture, I would like to extend from here the circle of consideration about various rationales for ending one's life. Voluntary death is always in an area of tension between condemnation and glorification. We also find the distinction between affect-based versus well-contemplated death, the death of the fool and the death of the wise. Manu recommends fasting to death for Brahmins after passing all possessions to their sons. They live on water and air. They move towards the northeast until they fall down. Suicide without special reasons, on the other hand, was shunned as a cardinal crime in Kautilya's Arthashastra. The Rajatarangini historical work lists several motives for suicide, like avoidance of impending calamities, atonement, better rebirth, protest or political demands, or also blackmailing. Self-sacrifice is a proof against unjustified suspicion. Making a big leap now into the 21st century, we still find this tension concerning voluntary death in any form. Even fasting to death would be in this tension. And in modern times, or postmodern times, one cannot ascribe the pros and cons specifically to secularized or religious groups. For example, there are differentiated voices against euthanasia among secularized people, not only among religious people. The discussions about active or passive euthanasia are going on in political, juridical, theological, philosophical, and medical circles, and on grassroots levels. Now, back to the Jainas. In the jungle of ethical dilemmas and contradictory reasons, the Jaina way to ultimate purification stands out as a very consistent system in spite of its scriptural and historical variances. Fasting unto death is one of the outstanding features of Jaina soteriology, has puzzled even serious researchers, as is evident from critical comments by those giants like Barnett, Winternitz, and Rice. They either see the principle of ahimsa violated, or they diagnose it as a result of a morbid view of life. But seen from within the tradition itself, the act is not violent. It is regarded as the epitome of tapas. The final phase of remaining immobile in Kayotsarga, on a bare rock, is as non-violent as is possible in this loka filled with jivas. In this universe, where not even a hair's width is free from living beings, the only possibility not to injure beings is the complete inaction. The interpretation of morbidity is also not compelling, since death is only the end of one form of existence in a countless series of existences, and as such, death is a life-to-life transition. The possible forms of life are countless, the individual biographies are varied, and the ultimate goal of leaving samsara altogether is the goal of a jiva who is ripe for it. It's not for everyone who is ripe for it. The Jaina modes of dying represent an outline of Jaina individual eschatology and its stringent emphasis on the hour of death. Human birth is very precious and should be used to purify the soul by dissociating it from its karmas. Therefore, one should not abandon life as long as one is able to pursue the path of purification. However, the Jainas consider the death by fasting a highly dignified way of ending life, which otherwise would not be conducive for purification anymore, or which, as we learn from the self-sacrifice of the Muni, Yati Vrishabha, has to be given up for the sake of the community. Fasting is a self-denial of food and drink at the right time, at the right place, and in the right way. It is the telos who die in intensive concentration, vigilant like the archer who hits the Chandraka Vedyaka, that is the pupil of the eye, as it is said in the canonical Chanda Vijaya, alluding to the well-known fact of the art of, alluding to the well-known feat of the art of archery, when the archer hits the eye of a peacock feather or a fish circling very fast in the air. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. We have now, I think we should stretch it a little bit, no? 15 minutes for discussion.
I just want to know in what meaning and in what context the word kavacha is used in Bhagavati Aradhana.
Yeah.
Kavacha.
Yeah.
What is the meaning of that here?
It's the protective religious instruction. It's an armor.
Okay.
Armor against any parishas. So,
what context?
in what context?
Huh?
It's one of the 40 steps of the Bhakta Pratyakhyana.
Bhakta Pratyakhyana.
Yeah, it's one of the 40 steps. And I don't know now which step it is. It's a little advanced. It's quite an advanced step.
Using that word kavacha,
Yeah.
what does he mean there?
He means the superintendent teacher gives the aradhaka, the one who is willing to die, an armor.
What is that armor?
Armor is like a...
Is the stories are the armor or the advices are the armor? Here.
See. He gives him he teaches him the doctrine. That's one type of armor. He tells him stories. That's another type of armor. All this, what he teaches him, tells him, the way he supports him, that's the kind of armor.
At the end of the Vaddaradhane, the Kannada 19 stories, at the end of that text says, here ends the Vaddaradhaneya Kavacha. Here ends the Vaddaradhana's Kavacha.
Exactly.
Kavacha word is used.
Exactly. The Vaddaradhana is, the content is just this portion of the whole Bhakta Pratyakhyana. So the Vaddaradhana is not the whole thing, it's just the Kavacha.
Kavacha.
And therefore the life of the sages is the main content of the Vaddaradhana. So that's why. And that's why you picked out now the Kavacha. Yeah, because of the Vaddaradhana.
The story you narrated, that Ganini, Ganini, he killed himself.
Yes, he did.
Is it accepted as a Salekana or Samadhi Marana?
No, it's not a Salekana.
It is not Salekana.
No, it's
it
not
is not Samadhi Marana.
That is a Samadhi Marana.
Samadhi
Exactly.
Marana.
He didn't have time for Salekana.
Yeah. So, is it equal to Harakiri in Buddhism?
I mean, Harakiri is a very modern concept of Eastern Buddhism. But you can say,
Is it
the method might be the same. He cut
but on a protest, Harakiri is being.
There are different.
There is no religious background for Harakiri.
There might be political motives. There might be other motives.
I don't know what is
losing one's face, and then.
What is the practice in Jaina circles? If you have, normally our practice is that you have one question and one answer, and then the next person takes the microphone.
Okay.
So I don't want to interfere with established Jaina practices. Maybe I should be more lenient on this, but I'm not quite sure. Where would you think one should stop? Maybe one cross questioning and then. Okay. So the next person is Keshav.
Ma'am, I was interested in the metaphors of battlefield and warrior because it almost seems against the entire Jaina system of ethics of non-violence. And what is your comment on that?
I think it's very, it fits very well in the whole system. The Jainas are the protectors of the Jainas are the Kshatriyas. It's not the Brahmin setup, it's a Kshatriya setup. And why shouldn't they use metaphors coming from warriors? And I think on another level, it's not so strange to compare the...
No, you attend my lecture tomorrow. You will have the answer.
Okay, it's not so strange. We'll hear that. That the way of purification with all its difficulties is compared to a battle. It's not too strange. Yeah.
The process of dhyana, attaining keval jnana and liberation, is utterly personal in the Jain code of conduct. Is it not a queer thing to observe various austerities and acceptance of Sallekana become public affairs? And is the description of 48 Niryapakas, attendants, an exaggeration? What do you think?
Yeah, that is a very curious thing. I think the prominence of Pratyakhyana as a public affair is very strange for us, for me. For me, I sympathize more with Ingini and Prayopagamana.
No. Actually, Bhakta Pratyakhyana, the Sallekana, at the end, it becomes a social affair.
No. Ingini is not a...
Ingini is not.
Ingini is not a social affair because he is alone, and Prayopagamana he is alone. So it's not a social affair.
But Sallekana?
Sallekana is only a preparation, it's a vow. So in order to answer this, I think you're right. It's a very strange thing to make it a public affair. But on the other hand, it is, as it is written in the text, a highly dignified affair. But we know already from history that there was a kind of dying tourism to Shravana Belgula to watch people die, because that gives me some merit, and that is, of course, I'm sorry, and that is, of course, very strange. So, but in order to understand the whole structure and the steps, I'm very thankful to Shivaya that he listed it up, because otherwise, how would I understand Ingini? But it is a strange affair.
No, it becomes, automatically it becomes a social affair. Just 2 months ago, the wife of my friend in Dharma, she went to one village, nearby village, where there is a newly found Pashunatha idol was there. There was a nun. She went there and she in privacy discussed with that nun, telling that I think their death is approaching me, because she was a cancer patient, had the chemotherapy. Doctors told she is going to survive after the chemotherapy only for 3 days, but she survived for 8 months. And suddenly one day she wanted to go to that place to meet the nun. She spoke to the nun in privacy and visited all her relatives with all social relationship, came home, and suddenly she became silent. And they phoned to the nun and they asked her what is the reason. Nun said, you bring her immediately to my place. They took her there, and there she was given the Brahmacharya Diksha first day, second day the Nan Diksha, third day Yamasallekana, because the death was approaching and there was no remedy for her survival. When there is no remedy for survival, Upasarge, Durbhikshe, Jarasi, Rujayam cha, Nishpratikare, for all these circumstances, when there is no remedy, you will take the death, you will invite death. And when people came to know this lady has taken the Yamasallekana, suddenly people started coming there, praising her, singing, and all the devotional songs and everything. The third day, she breathed her last. And this became automatic social gathering and social religion.
I have a small
There's
question.
another person here. Nikhil?
Yeah, thank you. That was very fascinating. I just wanted to know, so if I understood right, this death should happen in a state of full awareness and concentration.
Yes?
But I'm just thinking it's so unlikely, right? I mean, surely, you're fasting, you're not having water, you'd probably go, to lose them very loosely, you go a little crazy. Is there some awareness of, surely this is, isn't there some dissenting voice saying that this, maybe 1% will do it in this ideal way, but a lot of people will, as this goes on, it just doesn't compute, in any sense. So I'm just wondering if in the tradition there is some sense of this at all, or it's just...
No, that makes much sense, of course. The way of dying, each person dies his or her own death. And the dying is not the same from one person to the other. And this is a kind of ideal dying and ideal process of dying, I think, which is aimed at, but there is no guarantee that I can reach it. And what happens in a person who gives up food and especially fluid, that's the problem, that's the bigger problem. Whether this person falls into kind of unconsciousness or lethargy or in Shukla Dhyana, I don't know. No one knows, I think. But the prescribed way, I think, is very logical for the Jaina system. And it is a highly dignified way. But idealized, it's written in the text. How it is practiced is another question. And it's also how the whole the public affair is managed. That's always another problem. But I just refer to text, and even not to the present time. But as I said already in Shavana Begura in times, there was a 10th century dying tourism.
Okay, Dr. Soni, first, you had a question?
You have a question there? Just one point. One is that the death process is part of the process of life, of living. Just as you learn to live well, you also learn to die well, because it is part of going from one life to the other. The other question about the use of army or weapons metaphors is when the Jains talk about non-violence, it is because they know what violence is and why non-violence is more important than violence. So that the Kshatriyas are the protectors of the tradition is based on the fact that the non-violence is emphasized by those who know what violence means.
I have one question and one comment. You see, the kavacha is usually meant to protect, okay? Protect the body, right?
No, not the body. I mean, yeah,
Kanchuka,
for a soldier, okay, it's to protect the body, but not for the dying person. It's
But,
to protect the whole
No,
person.
the kavacha in classical literature, do you come across anywhere except in Jaina?
Kanchukas.
Kanchuka, okay. Kavacha, I'm talking about kavacha. Kavacha is usually to protect the body, but in the Jaina context, it has been used to legitimize death. Like that is one comment. Let me have a question. See, when the karma is gone, Sambara and Nirjara both have happened, taken place, there is almost no body because karma is not inflowing, okay. So, the man is almost like a kavali. isn't it? Almost. I am not telling Keval. In it's a Jnana Swarupa. So in that case, what is the necessity of giving so much importance to body and its fall? And I think it is a later Jaina development that has crept into the Jaina history, and that is why instead of celebrating life, they have also started celebrating death, and in a very contradicting way in many places. But